Hello everybody, and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Karen Arriviaga, and I work with CallTracks, and we're very excited to have everybody join us for this webinar about managing multiple standards in the laboratory. Before we get started, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Yes, this is going to be recorded, and so if you want to watch it again or share it with other team members once it's over, you'll actually get an email from us with the link to that recording, and you can access it once it's available. Also, we will have a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to go ahead and put those in the Q&A section in the Zoom webinar application. We'll collect those, and at the end of the presentation today, we'll go through those and just try to get some answers to you if you have some specific questions. Well, to go ahead and get started, we have a lot of different types of organizations and people in this webinar today, and some who have actually never may have heard of CallTracks before. So I just want to give you a little bit of background. What CallTracks is, we're an all-in-one compliance management solution with the purpose of really helping organizations manage that quality burden that they sometimes get with manual systems that they've created. Organizations turn to CallTracks when they're looking to bring automation into their organization to really streamline those efforts and make it less risky for their organization. We've been around for about 28 years. Our product actually stems from ISO 9001. About 28 years ago, our parent company needed to be under that type of compliance, and they started going through the process and quickly realized that there was a lot to manage if they were going to do it manually. So they started building software. Long story short, that software was CallTracks. The auditor comes in and says, this is something that others need. You should share it with others. And that's really how our organization came to be. So today we're happy to count many organizations under different types of compliance that use CallTracks, as well as our presenter that we have on today, ANAB. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Melanie. So Melanie Ross with ANAB has over 20 years of experience in quality assurance, quality control, and quality management. She has worked in several industries, including chemical, biological, oil and gas, and aerospace. Her main role in each of these industries was the development of management systems, including internal audit programs, vendor qualification procedures, and implementation of Lean Six Sigma. Currently, Melanie is the technical products developer for ANAB, designing and delivering training courses and supporting client outreach through business development activities. Her role serves as a technical resource to customers, assessors, and other interested parties. So at that time, Melanie, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can share yours.
All right, let me get to it.
And I can see it.
And you can hear me?
I can.
Great. All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Karen. Before I get started, for those of you who are not familiar with ANAB, we are an ILAC signatory accreditation body that provides accreditation services to conformity assessment bodies, which include testing and calibration laboratories, inspection bodies, validation and verification bodies, as well as certification bodies who certify organizations to management system standards, such as ISO 9001. We also, as Karen said, provide training in the form of public and private training sessions, as well as we have self-paced training and special offerings such as this webinar. Now, let's just jump into managing multiple standards in the laboratory. Keep in mind, while the title states laboratory, the discussion here today can apply to any organization that is managing multiple standards or would like to integrate multiple standards into their management system. During this presentation, we will look at the overlapping requirements across ISO standards through the use of the ISO Casco Toolbox and common structure of management system standards. We will identify some of the common elements across the different standards, as well as strategies for managing the overlapping requirements and integrating the requirements into the management system of the laboratory. This includes regulatory requirements as well. We will round out the discussion. With with benefits of integrating multiple standards into one management system. As Karen already mentioned, there will be time at the end for questions, so please submit those in the Q&A feature in Zoom as you think of them. Before we begin, let's talk about some of the standards that may be implemented in the laboratory. At the bottom of this triangle is ISO 9001. It is the standard for quality management systems and can be applied to any type of organization. This standard contains the requirements necessary to build a quality management system and is a good resource to laboratories, even if the laboratory is not considering certification to the standard. The next step up is ISO IEC 17025, which is applicable to testing and calibration laboratories specifically. It contains the general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. Laboratories accredited to 17025 must meet the requirements of this standard. Other technical standards include ISO 17034 for reference material producers and ISO IEC 17043 for proficiency test providers. These are only a few of the numerous standards that organizations can use to develop, implement, and maintain their management system. There are others, including ISO 14001 for environmental management systems and ISO 18001 for occupational health and safety, just to name a couple. Now, let's compare ISO 9001 and ISO IEC 17025, since those two are the most common from the list we just went over. ISO 9001 details general management system requirements that can be applied by any organization providing any product or service. I have seen moon bounce manufacturers certified to ISO 9001, or even trucking companies that provide hauling services. Any organization can implement the requirements of 9001 to demonstrate their ability to provide consistent products and services that meet the standard's requirements. When we are talking about general management systems, the term here is certification. Once we get into the technical standards, such as 17025, the term accreditation is used. 17025 adds on to the general management system requirements with technical laboratory requirements. Laboratories must demonstrate competence in order to achieve accreditation. These technical standards are housed in what is called the ISO Casco Toolbox. ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, and it is the organization that develops these standards. Casco is the Committee on Conformity Assessment. The committee works on issues relating to conformity assessment, which is testing, calibration, inspection, and so on for the standards listed here, including 17025. You can see that management systems is included in the toolbox. This is an indirect relation to ISO 9001 in that ISO IEC 17021-1 is the standard that certification bodies must follow when certifying organizations to ISO 9001. The toolbox also contains requirements for inspection bodies, verification and validation bodies, and certification bodies for products and people. There are many benefits to certification and accreditation using ISO standards. Consumers, conformity assessment bodies or organizations, and regulators benefit from the use of ISO standards to implement and maintain management systems. Consumers use certification or accreditation as a basis for selecting products and services. Certified and accredited organizations have a set of rules, so to speak, to follow to manage their operations using their management system. This adds confidence to the products and services provided. These organizations are audited or assessed by independent third parties that attest to the management system's conformance to requirements. It is a means to ensure that the products and services meet specifications and requirements, as well as aids in avoiding the cost of product and service failures. For regulators, ISO standards are a way to achieve public policy goals and a means to enforce national health, safety, and environmental legislation. Think of food safety or water safety, or the hot topic these days of cannabis and its medicinal use. There are regulations in each of these areas. So you can see ISO standards benefit everyone along the supply chain, as well as other interested parties, such as regulators. Now let's talk about how these standards work together. With so many standards available, how can an organization even begin to make sense of it all? ISO, along with IEC, created directives for committees and subcommittees to follow when creating new or revising existing ISO standards. The directives define a high-level structure for all management system standards. All ISO standards begin with clauses 1 through 3, which cover the scope, normative references, and terms and definitions. As the technical standards are revised, Clause 8 is reserved for management system requirements. Those requirements are aligned as much as possible to the management system requirements in ISO 9001 through common text for the management system requirements, along with common terminology. While the directives are specific to management system standards such as ISO 9001, technical standards such as 17025 have also adopted the common text for management system requirements and common terminology as well. This makes for integration and combination of standards into one management system easier because the same or similar management system requirements are included in each of the standards. As an example, when 17025 was revised in 2017, these common management system requirements were included in Clause 8. We will look at those requirements in a couple of slides. The common text and terminology are housed in Annex SL of the ISO IEC Directives Part 1. Again, this allows for a harmonized approach for management system standard development and revisions. Appendix 2 of the Annex provides further details on the harmonized structure, as well as guidance for management system standard writers. So even ISO recognized that organizations may use multiple standards to implement and maintain a management system, and these directives and Annex aid in ensuring those standards are aligned and harmonized before they are published for use by organizations. There are many different definitions of management systems. It is a set of policies, processes, and procedures used by an organization to ensure that it can fulfill the task required to achieve its objectives, or a systematic framework designed to manage an organization's policies, procedures, and processes. Or it can be an interrelated parts of the business in order to meet objectives. Basically, it is how an organization ensures work is accomplished. While some people may consider the management system that, quote, thing that meets standard requirements, it is so much more than that. When organizations consider the management system as the business or the entire organization, it is much easier to integrate multiple standards into it, and managing the requirements of those standards becomes much more efficient. Yes, a management system is required by the standards, but really, all organizations have some form of management system, whether they are certified or accredited or not. It is those policies and procedures that govern the work being performed, whether they are documented or not. While we are talking about management systems, let's discuss the new options for management systems within the laboratory. Laboratories can choose between option A or option B when developing their management system. Option A states that the laboratory must implement a management system that addresses all of the requirements in Clause 8 of the 17025 standard. These include, but are not limited to, corrective action, addressing risks and opportunities, management review, and internal audits. Option B allows the laboratory to maintain a management system in accordance with ISO 9001 that is also capable of supporting the consistent fulfillment of the 17025 standard requirements. Such a management system would then meet the requirements of Clause 8 of the 17025 standard. Regardless of the option chosen, laboratories must meet all of the 17025 standard requirements for their management system. And you can see with these options, ISO 9001 is a part of 17025 when we look at the management system requirements. These are the management system requirements that are both in ISO 9001 and 17025. In 17025, again, these requirements are housed in Clause 8, while in 9001, the requirements are throughout the standard. Regardless of the standard, any organization seeking certification or accreditation must have management system documentation that is controlled. They must also control records and take actions to address risks and opportunities. The concept of risk was introduced in the 2015 edition of 9001 and requires organizations to consider risks, including risks to impartiality, and plan actions to address those risks. Organizations must continually improve through improvement initiatives and feedback from personnel and customers, as well as consider corrective actions for nonconformities. All ISO management system standards also require organizations to perform internal audits per a schedule and program and management review at planned intervals. These requirements are key to successfully implementing, maintaining, and improving a management system at any organization. While the management system requirements are nearly identical across the standards, there are other common elements of certified organizations and accredited laboratories. Certified and accredited organizations must define their scope of activities or work. This must be defined regardless of the standard governing the management system. For accredited laboratories, this is typically the scope of accreditation issued by the accreditation body. Here, I have vendor qualification in quotes because each standard calls it something a little different, from externally provided products and services in 17025 to control of externally provided processes, products, and services in 9001. And each organization may call it something different, from supplier approval to subcontract review to vendor qualification. But it is all still ensuring that the products and services provided by an outside organization meet requirements and are of a stated quality level. All management system standards include resource requirements as well. These resources range from personnel to infrastructure to equipment. Communication requirements are similar as well. These communication requirements involve management ensuring personnel understand the importance of meeting customer requirements, understand the significance of the standard requirements, and understand their roles and responsibilities, just to summarize a few. And finally, change management. One of the important aspects of a management system standard is to ensure that organizations manage change to minimize negative impacts and optimize positive impacts on the organization when making changes to the management system and/or procedures. Oftentimes, certification or accreditation is required within a regulation, so the requirements in the regulation flow from the standard requirements. We see from ISO 9001, the definition of regulatory requirement is an obligatory requirement specified by an authority mandated by a legislative body. When regulatory requirements apply to the organization, the regulators or regulatory authorities become interested parties of that organization. Where regulations or regulatory requirements apply to the organization, those requirements must be included in the management system. One way to ensure this occurs is to add those requirements to an internal audit checklist or workflow, but be sure the requirements are checked regularly to make sure that any changes are incorporated. Another way is to include regulatory compliance as an organizational objective, then review compliance to those requirements during management review. When integrating multiple standards, consider the activities within the laboratory as processes within the management system. This will assist in tying those activities to the appropriate standard, as well as ensuring the management system applies to the laboratory's operations. Remove silos by harmonizing activities. This does not mean standardizing activities. The activities can be performed in various ways, depending on the department, but a harmonized procedure could apply to all departments. One example here is use of incubators. At a previous employer, each department had their own procedure for the use of an incubator. That was at least 6 procedures to manage, when one harmonized procedure would suffice. This is just a simple sample. Maybe you can think of others for your laboratory or organization. What activities or processes are performed throughout the organization? Can those activities or processes be harmonized? Oftentimes, there is pushback on process harmonization. A good way to determine if processes can be harmonized is to map out each process using sticky notes. Then overlay the notes that are the same steps. Any notes that are not overlaid are different. Could those be addressed using a note in the procedure? Or are they so different that they cannot be harmonized? Next, risk-based thinking can assist in determining the appropriate way to document and organize the management system to minimize risks and promote opportunities. Processes with higher risk may need more attention and documentation, while processes with less risk require less focus. And finally, establish policies and objectives throughout the organization. All too often, we see organizations with accredited laboratories where the policies and objectives pertain to business-related activities, such as product orders and sales, and the laboratory is left out. It is a requirement to establish policies and objectives in both 9001 and 17025, so that must be kept in mind when integrating the management system. When managing multiple standards, compare the requirements of each standard to the other. You will be surprised how many overlap. As we saw earlier, many requirements are the same, but called something slightly different. Some requirements may be similar, but have additional details in one standard than another. The organization will need to decide if the additional details will apply across the board or only to one department, such as the laboratory. Oftentimes, it is easier to apply the more stringent requirement across the board than to have multiple layers of requirements, depending on who is doing the work or what work is being performed. Once you've compared the requirements from each standard, map the clauses to the current documents, such as procedures, work instructions, workflows, and work processes to ensure that the requirements are met. Knowing how each clause is addressed in the management system is important to ensure there are no gaps. Gaps could lead to nonconformities during internal and external audits or assessments. If there are any gaps, fill them either with changes to current processes or the implementation of new processes. It is important to tie the requirements to the documented information within the management system so that it is easy to find during internal and external audits. This can be done in a variety of ways. We are here today with CallTracks, and they have a neat feature where you can tag documents with not only the standard to which they apply, but also the specific clause or clauses that are covered by that document. As a side note here, the standards have sort of moved away from the need to have a quality manual. But the organizations that are managing multiple standards, a quality manual could be a useful tool to document how the requirements of each standard are met. But keep in mind, as stated in Annex A of ISO 9001, there is no requirement for the structure of the management system to align with the clauses of any particular standard. Quality manuals of the past used to follow the flow or typically followed the flow of 9001. For instance, having the sections of the manual numbered the same as the clauses of the standard. This hindered the management of multiple standards because each standard is numbered slightly differently. Think instead of relating documented information to the processes of the organization and information maintained for those purposes. You can look at Annex A of ISO 9001 for additional information. Maintaining multiple accreditations and/or certifications under one management system umbrella allows the organization to gain efficiencies. The resource and process requirements are uniform across the organization and managed as a whole rather than in silos. Laboratory personnel can then focus on the technical requirements needed to perform the measurements or tests, while the management system manages the rest. Oftentimes, management systems with multiple standards within them are called integrated management systems or unified management systems. The requirements of each standard are integrated where possible and unified where appropriate. Requirements that are unique to one standard are still housed in the management system, but they are tagged as only applying to certain processes or certain personnel. Another aspect when integrating requirements into one management system is communication and access to information. Users of the management system, such as production and laboratory personnel, need to understand what the requirements are and how those requirements are translated into the work that they do. They also need to have access to the documents, procedures, work instructions, workflows, forms, etc., that they need in order to do their work. The more accessible the management system is to personnel, the more likely they are to use it appropriately. Before I turn it back over to Karen, I wanted to leave you with some additional resources that ANAB has to offer. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standards requirements, and other topics. We offer live webinars like this one where we are partnered with CallTracks. And finally, we offer training in many areas, including internal auditing, standards, and risk. My screen just went blank. I don't know if everybody else's screen went black, but I'm just going to finish up and then I'll unshare so Karen can share. As with assessments, training has changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. All of our traditional in-person courses have been converted to live online versions and include exercises and discussions related to the topic. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. Now I'll turn it back over to Karen to show you how an electronic document management system can make managing multiple standards efficient and easy.
Well, the good news, Melanie, is that though your screen went blank, we could still see your slide. So,
well, great. It just, my screen went completely dark, so it threw me off.
There's always some little type of hiccup. Hopefully that's what we get for this one, right?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
All right, let me share my screen with everyone. And so, Melanie, thank you. I mean, I think sitting back and listening to your conversation and just how the standards relate with each other and how people are managing them and some of their options, I thought was really good content. And so I know that we'll have some good questions here. If we already have some coming in, I encourage everyone to continue those questions, and we can definitely have a good conversation here towards the end. So really, at the end of the day, with CallTracks, we're having conversations on a regular basis actually with organizations that are under different types of compliance pressure. Usually the ISO standards are the ones that we talk to the most, but then there's also state requirements, and then there's also some specific customer requirements that organizations will have that they need to fall under as well. And so when you think about the amount of work required to conform to one standard and then multiply that with some of the others, these are our team members and the people using our product are always looking for ways to manage it together and in a system that's going to be give them more visibility into their quality systems. And so that's usually where the conversation with organizations like us begins. CallTracks was really designed specifically to help lessen the amount of manual work by automating so much of the quality management processes and as much of that as possible. And so this also includes helping customers manage their multiple standards in our organization or in our system. I'm going to pull up CallTracks and we're going to just dive right in. The first thing I'm going to show you is exactly what Melanie mentioned in her presentation, which is the way to tie documentation and your SOPs and your processes to the specific clauses of the standard in CallTracks so you can have visibility into how your procedures directly relate to that standard and those clauses. If I click the Documents tab over here, to give you just a quick background on documents, especially if you've never seen CallTracks before, our document management area was really designed to be a document repository for all of your documents while offering the control necessary to meet document management standard requirements. So this includes tracking the full document editing process with automated audit trails, while guaranteeing that anytime an employee comes to this document tree, they're always going to see the last published revision of that document. There's a lot of control that's happening on the back end of this through the editing process to make sure that that risk is no longer there. Documents are going to be easily accessed through this customizable document tree. And we even have a PDF converter in the system. So as you're bringing in your Word documents or Excel documents, it'll automatically convert it into PDF so users can access that directly in CallTracks and know they can't edit them. So whether you're an organization that's new to ISO or an organization with 15 years of compliance experience, knowing how your processes and procedures relate to the clauses of a standard is going to be important to you. You know, if you're creating a report to send to your assessor about how your documents align with that standard, that's something that you're going to be able to generate directly in this system. So what I'm going to show you, if I go to the properties of this safety manual, the first page you're going to go to is some of just the general requirements for that document. One of those is actually choosing what standard and what clause of the standard that document applies to. So if I come down here, I can see like with title, ID number to generate a PDF. If I've got standards here, I can actually open this up and see that I have a list of standards to choose from. Now, disclaimer, these are demo systems that I'm showing you. And so we have a lot of different types of standards in these systems to show concepts. When customers of CallTracks, we only put the standards that that organization is under into their system. So if I come down here and I'm like, okay, this safety manual is really directly related to a specific clause in 9001. We don't have the full standards in here for copyright purposes, but to kind of get the idea of what we're doing here, you can actually select those specific clauses here, add them, and now when you run your reporting, it will actually show you how the safety manual relates to the specific clauses of the standard that you have chosen. We would hit changes and so on. So when Melanie talked about the ability to connect your documents to the specific clauses, you get to be as granular as you possibly want to in the standard. You know, she mentioned things like water testing laboratories and cannabis laboratories and some of these new different types of organizations that are coming out that the states are starting to bring a lot of pressure on. This is where talk to us. We'll talk about what those requirements are. And if you can give them to us, we can put them in your system for you. And so you can connect those to those documents. Now, where does this pay off? Well, doing all of this work is actually going to pay off specifically around the reporting part. So if I click the reports tab, we actually have a number of system reports that will come standard in your CallTracks instance. One of those is our document by standards report. This report is a very handy report to see exactly how your documents align with the standards. So I would come in here, choose, let's say 9001 and 17025, hit select, choose some parameters I want to check into and hit run. And what you'll see is that I actually will have a visual diagram down here of the number of documents per each standard and how they relate. But then also we have detailed information in here about those specific documents and where they correspond. What's nice about this, as you're looking at this visual representation, this is a great way to run gap analysis. So if you're an organization, especially one that's moving to 17025 or 9001 for the first time, and you're looking at this and notice, hey, I have no documentation here supporting this specific clause of the standard, that's a red flag, right? This is a great way to be able to identify that, to be able to make sure that you as an organization are putting the right effort into making sure that that clause is being addressed in your quality system and management system. That's one way that you'll see standards get wrapped in with CallTracks through documents. Another way that you'll see this is actually through our workflows. So what workflows is the ability to offer process automation for some of those core processes that you see in 17025 and even 9001 and other compliance pressures that you may be under. So think about this, right? Corrective action requests are something that everybody does. These corrective action requests need to follow a certain process per the standard that you're under. What CallTracks is doing is automating this process, defining key steps and creating routes between those steps to make sure that that process is being held in a timely manner, to make sure people can't deviate from that process, and to guarantee that quality managers are going to get the reporting and visibility that they need at the end of that process to know that it was done correctly, and ultimately share with your assessor too if they ask questions around it. With CallTracks, our workflows, when you purchase the system, you get our best-in-class workflows that will come standard. Some of those include like nonconformance tracking, customer feedback, and corrective actions. So how does this work with multiple standards? Let's look at corrective actions for an instance. So if we have an example where, let's say there was a nonconformance and a piece of equipment wasn't calibrated in a timely manner within the organization, that would possibly be a nonconformance that would kick off a corrective action request. So I could come in here and say on today's date in this section of the organization, or there was a piece of equipment that wasn't standard, that wasn't calibrated. Well, I know that is in direct violation of a specific clause within 17025. You would be able to come in here and choose that specific clause. If there was a clause for 9001 as well, you could choose that too and add those selections. From there, give a description of the observed issue, so equipment. Any immediate action taken, we took the equipment offline and so on. You can add supporting documentation. You know, if this was originally coming in through a customer complaint and you want to add the email to this, you can. Goal with CallTracks is to have everything that deals with quality in one location to make it easier to have better visibility into that information and significantly reduce the time that you're spending trying to track down documentation and other things when what was the original source. From here, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we won't go through the whole corrective action because we only have so much time on this webinar, but I want to show you what this process looks like in our system. Our first step is completing the root cause analysis. Then you go into the corrective action plan and the proposed corrective action plan. Once that's finalized, you implement it and then even do effectiveness review and then eventually close it. What's nice about tracking these from a standard point of view is that then when you run reports on it, so let's pretend that this is one that we've kickstarted and now it's going to be in front of quality so they can go ahead and do the next action. I want to run a report of every corrective action request that's been in my system. I can come here, run this report, and be able to see the details of the standards that they're associated with. So here we've got a couple of corrective action records in here with different issues that we've come across and nonconformances. And so I can actually see in this report, I can report by standard. So this one was related to the T&I standards. This one was related to the 17025, and then this one was related to 9001. And so being able to really drill down and see that information, it can be very helpful, especially on a corrective action reporting standpoint. Take a step back, think about management review. When you're going through your management review for your organization, a part of that is reviewing your corrective action requests to try to identify risks and opportunities for improvement. If you come to these reports and actually can identify that maybe the same standard clause keeps repeating in some of your corrective action requests and nonconformances, that's probably a big red flag for you, and that's a risk for your organization. Process improvement would be a good idea. At that point, being able to have that visibility to identify those risks can be extremely helpful and really save a lot of time for your organization, especially if you're doing it manually. Now, corrective actions isn't the only workflow that you'll see reference to standards in. Another one of those is actually internal auditing. So if you're an organization that is doing internal auditing and you need to make sure that those auditors are really diving into specific areas of the standards and the clauses, you can actually tell them when you're setting up that internal audit, which standards that they need to be focused on during that internal audit that you're scheduling. To give you a quick snapshot of what this internal audit workflow looks like, you can see that just the very beginning of this is just collecting all the information of when the audit needs to happen and kicking off that information. And you're planning and preparing for that audit, because the person who's planning and preparing for the audit might be somebody different than the person that scheduled the audit, this person now knows exactly what is required of them and what they should be focused on. This handles and this manages and really eliminates the need to have a lot of back and forth between the parties, or meetings where you're grabbing everybody together and saying, okay, this is what I want you to do in that internal audit. Now you just fill that out in CallTracks. They're going to get an email and information in CallTracks and be able to continue on with that audit. You'll also notice in these, we do have the ability to launch corrective actions. So in the event that this audit happens and they find that there's a nonconformance, maybe around a specific clause, that information will be copied and pasted to this corrective action request. And so that information will continue through that process as well. And the last thing that I'll say, only because Melanie mentioned this, is the other way that you'll see multiple standards referenced in CallTracks, which is through vendor requirements. If you're an organization that has specific vendor requirements, this is also a place where you would often see what type of accreditation and standards that organization is under. So that is an option too. And the nice thing is that you have the ability to log as many as you want to. All of our workflows are going to be very configurable. So if you have multiple standards and you want to log that information in the system, you can make adjustments to make sure that that happens. With CallTracks, what we kind of reviewed today are just portions of what CallTracks does as a whole. Our goal and how the organizations that use our product today use it is really to help manage their quality systems and automate as much as they possibly can to eliminate a lot of that manual burden. So this includes document management, our workflow options that you have, which include the best in class, and the ability to build your own processes in our system as well. Testing and training, so tracking competency and awareness. And the most important thing is the reporting, having the visibility into your system to have a pulse on that quality system and management system and be able to get the information you need to properly run your QMS. So if there's anybody on here that's interested in learning more about CallTracks, now you do have some options. Feel free to reach out to us at sales@calltracks.com. We're happy to talk with you and talk about potentially getting you a demo so you can see what it looks like. We also have a 30-minute webinar that we offer every other week. This is a great way. It's just a quick 30 minutes. We do a very high level of the product so you can kind of see what some of that capability is and then determine if that's a conversation that you would like to continue. I'll go ahead and put this link into the chat for everyone. So if it's something that you want to participate in or attend, feel free to join us. And at that point, Melanie, I'm going to invite you back on and we're going to start going through questions because I see that we've got a number of them coming in.
Okay, I'm here.
All right, so the first one, you mentioned we already started with a good one. So thank you for jumping in early with your question. Our parent company, Heat Treatment, is ISO 9001 2015 certified. Testing lab is accredited to 17025 2017 for metal testing. Do we need to have both certifications?
So both certifications are not required. So a laboratory can be 17025 without 9001, but that is also up to your organization's decision and your customer requirements. If your customer doesn't require the laboratory to be 9001, then you don't necessarily need that certification. The Clause 8 of 17025 contains the management system requirements that are necessary for a 17025 accredited laboratory. So if you implement the items in Clause 8 of 17025, then you will be compliant for management systems.
Great question.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, that's I can imagine it's so dependent on the organization itself too, and yeah, that's a hard one. Here's another one from Patrick. Are ANAB the 17025 auditors presently taking the ISO 9001 cert as evidence that the lab meets option B without having to do a full review of section 8 in 17025?
So this question does come up quite often because the option A and option B seem to kind of muddy the waters a little bit for organizations that do have 9001. The intent of the option A and option B was to show how management systems can be integrated. So if you have 9001, you can integrate 17025 into that. So from an ANAB perspective, organizations that have that are 9001 certified, we still do a full assessment of clause 8 of the requirements of the standard. We may not dig as deep if you've already had your 9001 certification, but we are required to assess all clauses of the standard if it's a reassessment or initial assessment. Obviously, on a surveillance, we only look at a handful of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question. Here's one that came in through chat. Does ANAB as the accrediting body assess OSAC standards along with ISO 17025 and AR 3125 if the laboratory being assessed is the implementer?
So I did see that question come in the chat, and I am not on the forensic side of our business. So I would like to answer that offline and
Yeah.
ask one of our forensics accreditation managers if we do include that in when we do the AR 3125. I don't believe we do, but I want to follow up with that. So I'll get your contact information from Karen and follow up with you sometime this week.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Here's another one that came in through the chat. ISO standards are all related and seem to mesh well with each other. However, what we are interested in learning more about are trying to merge two standards that don't mesh well. For example, some tests being performed under CLIA and others being performed under 17025. And I think we actually have a question in our questions that kind of asks about this too.
Yeah, so it is a challenge when you have totally different requirements that, like CLIA requires one thing and 17025 requires another. In those cases, the CLIA requirements can still be a part of your management system. They're just a separate process. So if the item is being tested per the CLIA requirements, you follow the CLIA process. And if it's the 17025 requirements, you follow the 17025 track or that workflow. I saw this at a previous employer where we had government contracts. So we would test the same product, but one would be for the government contract and one would be for a product that we were selling or that we were producing, and we would just follow different tracks. So in that case, you can't necessarily harmonize the specifics of that requirement, but you can harmonize all the things around it, how the laboratory operates, your management review and internal audit. You would just want to bring in those CLIA requirements into your management review and your internal audit, so you're ensuring that you're meeting those requirements within the management system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Barahan, for the question that you put in the Q&A, let us know if that answer it doesn't kind of address what you were thinking of as well. Their question was, they're also having difficulty harmonizing the 17025 and the CLIA standard, and is there common things that should be considered based on things to do?
Yeah, it's difficult with 17025 because it's a testing standard for a broad range of products. So it could be from tires to fuel to biologicals to chemicals to anything, food, anything can be tested. So when you're looking at more of like the CLIA requirements, the 15189 standard is really more geared towards that medical testing and has some more of those requirements that are similar to the CLIA, not the same, but similar to those CLIA requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some organizations that they'll go to the 15189 program, and then also with CAP and CLIA and such like that. So we see that pretty often too. All right. These are great questions, everybody. Keep them coming. Here's another one. What is your big challenge in implementing an integrated QMS?
I've been thinking about this since I saw that question come in. So I think there's two. One is buy-in, getting buy-in from the leaders, from the people in the organization that it can be done. The other is getting too large, getting too complicated, having too many notes in a procedure because there's too many differences from one process to the next or one department to the next. So really looking at what processes can be harmonized and what need to be separate, and really thinking about that from a risk-based thinking, and what is the risk of having two side by side like CLIA and 17025, or can you raise the requirements of one to match the other so that you're doing the same across the board? So those really are the two challenges that I think I've faced when doing integrated management systems. And I had one that was 9001, 17025, and 17034 for reference material producer, plus those government contract requirements on top of it. So it's definitely a challenge, and it's not something that you can accomplish overnight, but integrate where you can. And then, like I said, with CLIA, ensure that your internal audit, your management review, your corrective actions, those all encompass every requirement that you have, so that you're ensuring that you're finding those gaps and weaknesses and fixing those along the way as well.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a very good idea. Yeah, I mean, even on our side, because we get questions like this sometimes as well. It's like, well, when people are going from like a legacy system that is very manual for the past 10 years and bringing it into Qualtrics for the first time, user adoption is a big part of that. Your system is only as good as you and the people that you have in your organization who are using it and really typing in the information and the data. And so we've done everything we can to kind of keep that in mind when designing the system as a whole, to try to make it as user friendly as possible for your employees to get in, get what they need to done, know when it's time to come in and get something done, and then log out and continue on with their day to day, just to kind of help with some of those hurdles.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Keith had a question. Will this help me with document changes? And I believe that you're talking about CallTracks. Absolutely. In fact, that's usually when you do a demo with us, that's usually where we get started with talking about CallTracks, is how this works with the document lifecycle and approving and reviewing and editing documents. Our system was built specifically to help manage that, and that's only one aspect of our system. Outside of workflows, testing and training and reporting. So if this is something that you're interested in diving into further, again, feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to dive into it and show you what that looks like and all of the bells and whistles, or feel free to join that webinar. I would say that that's usually the first place that people get started with Qualtrics, is starting to help manage documents, because it's such a heavy load of just manual work, writing down every revision, writing down every small little change and what happened and when, and replacing documents in a folder and getting rid of the old ones. Our system automates almost all of that process for you. Melanie, you actually can probably speak to this. You guys use Qualtrics.
Yes, we do. We use CallTracks to maintain our internal documents, and we do have a few workflows that we use as far as training and when we attend conferences and things like that. So we do use CallTracks, and we do manage our changes. There's the changes made field, so we can put in what we've changed, and then there's also compare revisions. So you can just pull up and it'll show you what was changed in the revision of the document. So it's really good, especially for me, for my role at ANAB, is I'm in business development, but I also manage some of the documents that are on our laboratory side, such as our guidance documents. So if somebody pulls that up and changes it, then I can go in and see what the changes were. And obviously they have permission to change it. They're not going in and rogue making changes to documents.
Right.
Then I can see what that change is. And if it's something that's relevant to training, then I can backtrack and change that in our training as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and to kind of continue this conversation, Melanie, I mean, what do you feel like the assessor's opinion is when they come into an organization that has something like Qualtrics?
Well, I actually used Qualtrics at a previous employer as well, where I was being assessed, not where I worked for the accreditation body. And it was an amazing tool for us to use. And I'm not saying that because you're here, Karen. But it was just easy to sit there in the conference room with a laptop, pull up the documents. They're right there, right available. Boom, boom, boom. We can show them, well, this is what's changed from the last time. Or if they say, what do you have for this standard? We can pull it up by using, pulling up the report or searching for it based on the standard. And then we could also have the documents that they needed when they went into the laboratory as well. So I've been to organizations also as an assessor where someone followed behind me with a laptop and they just had it pulled up. And whenever I'd say, okay, well, we're going to observe this test, can I see the procedure for that or the work instruction? They just pull it up right there, and I'd be able to look at it without printing it.
Yeah, that's nice. Saves a lot of time.
Yes,
That's for sure. A lot of time. Here's another question from Jennifer. Can you maintain all equipment calibration documentation and chemical expiration in CallTracks? Yes. You have some options here too. So if you wanted to keep it through documentation, you absolutely could, and have those documents being managed in CallTracks, updating those and setting triggers of when you need to look back into that, especially with some of those chemicals. Your other option, and what we're seeing more and more, is organizations use workflows for this. So actually one of the best in class workflows that we offer now is for equipment management. So this includes calibration, PMs, maintenance, or if there's downtime on equipment. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you have an equipment list in CallTracks, and you are recording every time there is some type of action that happens on that piece of equipment. So you have a full record that that is being happened, or that's happening. We actually did a webinar on that last year. I mean, it seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. And a whole webinar on just how you do equipment maintenance and tracking and such. So if that's something that you're interested in looking into, you can let us know, and we're happy to dive into that further. Chemical expiration. Sure, we do have some organizations that will do like reagent tracking. And so if they create a reagent and they need to track when it's going to expire, they can do that in workflows as well. That way they can know it's time to go or destroy that or do something with that expired reagent. All right. Let's see. Is it possible to integrate CLIA and ISO and/or any other relevant standards?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit before, and I think you just wanted some clarification here. It is possible to integrate those standards together, but only where they mesh. And you can see in the chat where Samantha said, well, I guess you can't see it, it says all panelists, that they found that the management reviews and safety were some of the only elements that they could merge, and the risk management as well. But it had to be built out because the requirements in ISO 17025 are very general for risk management, and they're much more complex for other standards. There's a lot more requirements for those. So you really just need to look at process by process, and there may be, you'll still have an integrated management system, but you'll have the CLIA requirements and you'll have the ISO requirements that are different, but they're all managed under the same management system. So you have personnel requirements that go above and beyond for CLIA than they are for ISO, but you still have personnel requirements. So, you have all those requirements that still flow. You still need to do your vendor qualification, but you may have a couple extra steps if it's for a CLIA related test. So you just have to look at where's the base for every standard that you have, and then what goes above and beyond that, and how do you build on that?
Absolutely. All right. And do companies use CallTracks to house all of their procedures, work instructions, and forms? If so, how is access to CallTracks managed? Yes, and yes, and yes. That is what CallTracks was kind of designed to do. Is our goal is to be that one centralized location for all of your quality data. So at the end of the day, it makes it easier for the quality managers to be able to get access to it, have better visibility, and really truly have confidence in their own QMS. And this is where, in these webinars that we do, we usually try to stay very specific to the presentation that, like Melanie, you had given about multiple standards. And so if this is something that you want to dive into further, yeah, please let us know, especially around your forms question. The really cool thing about CallTracks, and when you look at the series of products that we offer and the features that we offer, you've got document management. Everybody needs documents. You have these processes and such. From there, now you have to make sure that you're proving competency of your employees to those processes. That's where our testing and training features come in. But then we can go a step further, and that's where our workflows come in. Because it's great that you have a documented process, but though somebody might say that they read that document 3 months ago, how do you know as a quality professional that that person is actually following that process? If you can bring in process automation through workflows in our system, people can't deviate from those workflows because it's really locked down in our system. And so that's where you can just really take it the next step. We have organizations today that will get started with workflows. And then as their quality systems build over time, they just start developing more and more workflows. Like Melanie, you mentioned some at ANAB that you have that are pretty specific to your organization. They're not 9001 or 17025, but they're specific for your organization that they've created in CallTracks because that's where they saw a need. We don't limit the number of workflows that you can have in your system. So you get our best in class, but then it can even do more. Here's a question. Is this going to be a web-based, and I'm assuming you're asking if CallTracks is web-based? Yes. So CallTracks is a web-based product. It's a subscription, the software as a service product that is sold. And what that includes is the actual software. It includes your users and the licensing for those users. It also includes all of our support, all of our maintenance, all of our security, all of the upgrades of the system, your account manager that you talk with. And so there's a lot that kind of goes into that service. And I just want to make sure that we've gotten all of the questions. All right. I think that this is it, everybody. Great conversation today. Melanie, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Let me check one more thing to make sure I got it. I think I got them. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so very much for joining us today. We got done right at the 3 o'clock mark. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week and weekend. And let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.